A storm is breaking over Lake Geneva, and inside a rented villa 5 people are trapped indoors, daring each other to write a ghost story. 4 of them are adults. The 5th is an 18-year-old girl who has just buried a baby and run away from home. That night, she cannot sleep. With her eyes shut, she sees a pale student kneeling beside the thing he has assembled, and she watches it open one yellow, watery eye. By morning, she has the opening of a novel that will outlive every famous man in the room. Her name is Mary Godwin. She is not yet married. She is not yet 20. And she is about to invent science fiction. Here is the part the culture got wrong, and has kept getting wrong for 200 years. When you say the word Frankenstein, you're almost certainly picturing the monster, flat head, neck bolts, lumbering arms. But Frankenstein is not the monster. Frankenstein is the man who made him and then ran. The creature has no name at all. And that confusion, naming the abandoned child after the father who abandoned him, is not a trivia mistake. It is the exact wound at the center of the book. We will come back to that, because it changes everything. But first, the claim that sounds like exaggeration and isn't. A teenager effectively invented an entire literary genre. Let's be precise about what science fiction actually is, because people confuse it with stories about the future or stories with gadgets. It isn't. The historian Brian Aldiss, who wrote one of the foundational histories of the genre, argued that science fiction is something narrower and stranger, fiction in which the engine of the horror or the wonder is not magic, not a god, not a curse, but a man using the science of his own era to do something he should not. By that definition, Frankenstein is the first one. There is no spell. There is no demon. There is a brilliant student, a laboratory, and a method. Victor doesn't summon his creature. He builds it. That single shift, from the supernatural to the procedural, is the birth of the genre. And it could only have happened in that exact year, to a mind soaked in that exact moment. Which is the next thing nobody tells you. The science in Frankenstein was not invented by Mary Shelley. It was ripped straight from the most shocking experiments of her lifetime. In the years before she wrote, European audiences were paying to watch a procedure called galvanism, named after Luigi Galvani, who had made dead frog legs twitch by running electrical current through them. His nephew, Giovanni Aldini, took it further, and in 1803, he did it in public, on the corpse of an executed murderer named George Forster, in London. Aldini attached the wires to the dead man's face and spine, sent the charge through, and the corpse's jaw began to quiver. One eye snapped open, the muscles of the face writhed into a grimace, and a fist clenched and rose into the air. The official report of the event noted that to some of the bystanders it seemed as if the wretched man were on the point of being restored to life. One of the surgeons present was reportedly so shaken he died of fright not long after. Onlookers genuinely believed they were watching a corpse being dragged back from death by nothing but a machine and a wire. Mary Shelley grew up in the shadow of that spectacle. When she describes Victor giving a spark of being to lifeless matter, she is not fantasizing. She is reporting the cutting edge of 1816 science and asking the question the scientists weren't, and then what? That question, and then what, is the one the whole genre would inherit. But to ask it that early, she had to be a very particular kind of teenager. Mary was not a random girl at a party. She was, by birth, one of the most intellectually radioactive people in Europe. Her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote the founding text of modern feminism and then died 11 days after giving birth to her. Her father was William Godwin, a famous radical philosopher. Mary grew up reading her dead mother's books and reportedly learned to read in part by tracing the letters on her mother's gravestone in a London churchyard. Think about that image, a child taught to read on the stone marking the woman who died bringing her into the world. A creator who dies the moment her creation begins. She had been living inside the central metaphor of Frankenstein since before she could spell it. And that is why the book is not really about a monster. It is about what you owe to the thing you bring into existence. Read what actually happens, not the movie. Victor Frankenstein spends years obsessed, building a living being. He succeeds. And the instant it breathes, the instant it works, he is horrified by it and flees the room. He abandons it. The creature is not born evil. It is born alone. It teaches itself to speak by hiding outside a cottage and listening. It reads books it finds in the woods. It approaches people gently, and they beat it and drive it off, again and again, purely because of how it looks. Only after every door is slammed, after its own maker recoils in disgust, does it turn to violence. The horror of Frankenstein is not that the monster exists. The horror is that a creator walked away from his creation, and then blamed the creation for what abandonment made it. Now hold that up against the thing we still do today. Because here is the third fact that should stop you. The full title of the book is Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. Prometheus was the figure from Greek myth who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, and was punished forever for it. Mary Shelley chose that subtitle deliberately. Her warning was never, don't build things. Fire is good. Knowledge is good. Her warning was about what you do after you've lit the flame. Do you stay? Do you take responsibility for the consequences of what you've made? Or do you do what Victor does, create something powerful, recoil from it, and refuse to be accountable for what it becomes? If that sounds uncomfortably modern, that's the point. We are right now building systems and creatures of our own, artificial minds, synthetic life, technologies we switch on without quite knowing what they'll grow into. And the dominant instinct, over and over, is exactly Victor's instinct. Build the thing, marvel at the spark, then disclaim responsibility when it does something we don't like. A 19-year-old diagnosed that reflex in 1818, and we have not outgrown it. So when people sneer that Frankenstein is just a horror story, they have it precisely backwards. It is the most disciplined moral thought experiment of its century, written by the youngest author of any of them. And let's sit with how young, because the publishing world certainly didn't want to. When Frankenstein first appeared in 1818, it was published anonymously. It carried a preface by her husband, the poet Percy Shelley, and many readers and reviewers simply assumed he had written the whole novel. A book this philosophical, this ambitious, this controlled? Surely the work of an established male poet, not a young woman barely out of her teens. Some critics, on learning a woman might be behind it, called it unnatural and disgusting. It took years, and a second edition in 1831 with her name finally on it, for the world to accept the truth. The most influential debut of the era, the seed of an entire genre, was conceived by a teenage girl on a rainy holiday. There's a final detail that makes the whole thing almost unbearable. Remember her mother dying days after childbirth. Remember Mary herself, who by the time she finished the book had already lost her first baby, a premature daughter who lived only days. She once wrote in her journal of a dream that the baby had come back to life if only she could warm it by the fire. A dead child, warmth, and the desperate wish to reanimate what death had taken. That is not a coincidence with her novel. That is its furnace. Frankenstein is not a story about a scientist. It is a grieving girl's reckoning with creation, loss, and the terrible responsibility of bringing life into a world that may not want it. So the next time someone points at the green flat-headed monster and calls it Frankenstein, you'll know two things they don't. You'll know they've named the child after the man who abandoned him. And you'll know that the real monster of the story was never the creature stitched together in the lab. It was the gifted man who made a living thing and then refused to love it, refused to stay, refused to answer for what he'd done. A teenager saw all of that, 2 centuries before we built machines that force us to ask the same question. If this changed how you see Frankenstein, subscribe. Here we break down the most important books ever written, one argument at a time, and there are dozens more waiting to be cracked open. New video every week. And if this was worth 10 minutes of your life, hit like right now. It's the single signal that tells the algorithm a story like this deserves to be heard. Don't let it get abandoned.